Hi, my name's Richard Duffy. I'm the SAP Business One Product Evangelist. What I'd like to do in this next series of sessions is I want to take you through the process of creating your own private cloud. Or if you're an SAP Business One partner and you've been thinking about offering SAP Business One on demand and you have thought about the option of setting up your complete cloud offering where you can offer SAP Business One in a multi-tenant operation, the process I'm going to take you through in this series of sessions will show you exactly how to do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an infrastructure as a service provider. And the infrastructure as a service provider I'm going to use for this is TATA. TATA, as you may be aware, is a large Indian-based multinational corporation, and they have a number of different lines of business. One of their lines of business is involved in the hosting of data centers. They offer not only infrastructure as a service, but they also offer software as a service. So I'm going to use their infrastructure as a service platform, and I'm going to take you right from the very start of the process, setting up your own TATA infrastructure as a service account, and then going right through the process of building your virtual machines, configuring them, integrating them, installing all of the SAP Business One on demand components that you require, and then doing the final deployment of the SAP Business One Cloud Control Center. So this is going to be quite a few sessions, and I will break it up into a number of different blocks so you can follow on and do it in a logical series of steps. Now, a couple of things that you're going to need to do. You are going to need to have your own licenses, because when you configure the infrastructure as a service with TATA Communications and their infrastructure as a service platform, in the fees that you pay for access to that infrastructure as a service, you will get access to the operating system licenses that actually runs the servers. But all of your Windows Server client access licenses, your terminal services client access licenses, your SQL Server client access licenses, you will need to be providing all of those yourself. Now, if you're sitting there as an SAP Business One partner and you're thinking, well, gee, how do I do that if I want to start offering my own cloud-based solution? Well, what you'll need to do is you will need to have a conversation with Microsoft, and you will need to become what they call a service provider, and that will allow you to offer their subscription-based pricing, and that's under a model called SPLA. So you will need to have access to that kind of licensing and provide that kind of product. That's out of the scope of what I want to do in this session. Maybe if I get enough interest from people, I'll explain more about that in another session. But I'm going to assume all of your licensing components, you have got that taken care of. All right? So I'm just going to focus on actually building the whole infrastructure, configuring it all, getting Business One deployed so you're ready to go. And then the licensing, that will be a separate topic. So let's get going. What I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create myself an account on the TATA Infrastructure as a Service platform. So to get to that, you just need to go to ias.tatacommunications.com. And that will bring you into the TATA Instacompute.com website. And that's basically the brand name they've given to their infrastructure as a service. It's called Instacompute. And you can see there's a whole range of information available to you here that you can refer to. You can sign up for a free trial. You can go in here and you could just choose buy now and set up your own account, and so on. Now, if you want to know more about the Instacompute platform, again, you can find all that information here in their quick links. Also, if you're interested in looking at the pricing, you can go down here and you can check out the pricing structures. All right, and you can see that each of the instances is billed on the basis of the computing instance, where you choose how many cores and how much RAM and how much base storage you want. You then also pay your Windows licensing per virtual machine hour. And then there is also a storage and data transfer cost. All right, so all of those things are what you need to factor in. So there's a couple of virtual machines that we're going to want to build as part of this process. So your total cost will be the sum of all of those virtual machines, the hourly usage of those instances, the hourly usage of those instances for the calculation of your Windows licensing, as well as any of the storage and data transfer costs over and above that storage that is provided with the initial instance. So again, I would encourage you, familiarize yourself with exactly what you need, and then you can work out the pricing and how much it's going to cost you. But as I said, you can start off and you can go in here and you can access a free trial. So let's just quickly click on that free trial. All right, and then what will happen, you put in your username, your company name, and then the sales team at Tata Communications will get back in touch with you and we'll have a discussion with you and we'll set you up for your free trial service. All right, now you can mention to them that you watched this session provided by me, Richard Duffy from SAP, and I will, of course, let the Tata Communications Instacompute team know, or actually they already know that I'm building these sessions, so they should be, all things being equal, they should be aware of what you've seen, and when you ring up, they should be ready to look after your inquiry. So they're going to set you up with an account. I've already done that, so I'm going to go in, I'm going to log into my account. Now, I already have two separate sets of infrastructure that I'm running. The first set of infrastructure I'm running is the general SAP Business One Cloud demo system. And the second set of infrastructure that I'm running is the cloud infrastructure that I've set up, which a number of our software solution partners, or SSPs, are using to test their solutions in an on-demand / multi-tenant environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to set up an additional environment just for the purpose of building this demonstration. All right, so I'm going to take you right from the starting point all the way through to the end, and then when I've finished, so that those computing resources aren't being chewed up, I'm then going to take that environment and I'm going to delete it. All right, so I'll also explain to you how you go ahead after you've created virtual machines, how you can go in and delete those as well. So I'm going to put in my username and then I'll put in my password and I'll choose log on. Now, interestingly, you'll see that everything that I'm going to do as part of this process, I'm going to do through a web browser. All right, I'm using nothing but a web browser, and the web browser I'm using is Google Chrome, and I'm running it on a Macintosh. And not only that, I'm actually running all of this from a wireless 4G network connection. So really proving that this is a totally mobile, totally on-demand process, including all of the administration as well. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here in my projects and I'm going to set up a new project, because what you can do is you can have multiple environments on the TATA Instacompute Infrastructure, and you can track each one as a separate project and track all of your billing and your spend on the basis of each one of those projects. So if you wanted to set up different projects for different groups of customers, you can certainly do that. All right, so what I can do right now is I can go in here and I can say I want to add a project, and then it's going to bring in my new project creation. So I'll go in here and I'm going to call this my private cloud demo build. All right, and then I'm going to leave it as being the default owner, which will be me, and I'll allow myself as the project owner to view the financial information. Then I'm going to go in here, I'm going to say save. We'll give that a couple of seconds for that to come back and tell me that it's been saved successfully. And then I have my new project created. That's it. My project is now created, and the next thing I'm able to do is I am now able to go in, I can add additional people who can have access to managing this particular project from the console. I'm not going to do that. My next step is to go in and start creating all of my virtual machines. So in order to do that, I go in here to the Cloud Console. We'll give that a couple of seconds to start up. So now once I'm in the Cloud Console, it'll say, all right, which of these projects do I want to go into? So I want to select this one, my private cloud demo build. Give that a couple of seconds. And then it will give me the new dashboard or the new Cloud Console for this particular project. And this is where I can basically manage everything that's related to this set of infrastructure that I've created for this project. I can set up all of my virtual machines. I can manage the allocation of public IP addresses to those virtual machines. I can manage the port forwarding, so all the firewall configuration of those virtual machines. I can manage the allocation and deallocation of storage to those virtual machines, and so on. So the very first step that I want to go through is I want to go through and I want to create a number of instances. So with SAP Business One On Demand and the Cloud Control Center, the basic unit that we need to have created in order to manage all of our accounts and all of our provisioning is we need to have a Windows domain. So you're going to need to have a Windows domain controller. Now, for redundancy, you're going to want to make sure you actually have a primary domain controller and a backup domain controller. So I'm going to create two instances for those, but depending on the number of accounts you have, these can be very low spec machines. These can be very low spec instances. So remember, you are being charged according to the number of cores, you're being charged according to the amount of storage, and you're being charged according to the amount of RAM that is being used, as well as the amount of data being transferred over the web from that virtual machine. All right, so you don't want to underspec your virtual machines, but you don't want to overspec them either. The good thing is, if you have spec'd up an instance and you've decided, gee, well, I really need to bump that up with an additional core, some additional memory, you can go through the Cloud Console and you can do that. But I'm going to take this from the basic level. And I'm going to work on creating a system here which I believe will comfortably host up to 100 users. All right, so that's my goal, is to set up a system that's going to host 100 users. So let's go in here into our instances. And the very first thing I want to do is I want to go in here and I want to click on Add Instance. So once I say Add Instance, the next thing it's going to ask me, which of the zones that TATA have do I want to create these for. So right now in TATA's Instacompute environment, I actually have two zones. I have a data center in Singapore and a data center in India. I'm going to set this up on the Singapore data center. So in the availability zone, All right, I click on that drop down list and I choose Singapore. Now, the next thing I need to do is tell it what kind of partition or what kind of template do I want to use for building this virtual machine. So I'm going to say I want to use Windows Server 2008 R2 64-bit. So this comes with a 20 gigabyte primary disk and it has RDP enabled. So that's exactly what I want. So then I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to step 2. Now I need to specify how many cores and how much RAM do I need. So if all these machines are going to do is they're just going to sit there and run as domain controllers, then 1 core and 2 gigabytes of RAM, I believe, should be enough. Because again, remember, all I'm doing with these machines is running the domain services. You can, if you want to, make them bigger. I don't believe it's required, so that's why I set it up this way. So I'm going to give it 1 core and 2 gigabytes of RAM. Then I'll go to step 3. And what size disk do I want? So remember, my system disk is going to be 20 gigabytes in size. So if I'm going to want to do downloads and other things like that, I need an additional disk partition to utilize. So I always like to use a minimum of 100 gigabytes. So I'll select a 100 gigabyte disk. Then I'll go to step 4. Next thing it's going to ask me, how do I want the network to be configured? Now, there are 2 ways you can do this. With the TATA systems, you have the ability to connect over the internet, all right? So using a dedicated virtual network per project, controlling all the port forwarding through a set of public IP addresses. Or you can use TATA Communications' own MPLS network, which is, it's like a private network which you connect to. For me, what I want to do is have this available to anybody over the web, assuming that they have the right access credentials and so on. So I'm going to use the internet connected virtual network. So I'll go to step 5. Next thing is it's going to ask me to give it a name, which is optional. But I like to name each of my instances because it makes it easy for me to identify which instance is which, particularly if you may end up having a couple of instances that have a similar configuration. So you can't look at the config and say, well, that's this instance. Look at this config and say, well, that's a different instance, and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this my SBO CL Demo DC. So this is my SAP Business One Cloud Demo Domain Controller. I'm going to give it a group because I can group these machines together if I want. So I'll call this my SBO CL Demo. And what I'm going to do when the machine is created and it's time for me to go and start configuring Windows, I'm also going to use that as my domain name inside Windows as well. So that's it. I click on Submit, and then I'll let the system go ahead, and you'll now see what it's doing is it is provisioning that environment for me. So now that the instance has been created successfully, what you'll see is the instance has now been created here in the console. And you'll notice that you've been given a new password. Now, this is the password that you're going to need to use the very first time that you log on to this instance. So I highly recommend that you write this password down because you will need it in order to access the instance and go through the next stage of configuration. All right, so that's our first domain controller created. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a second instance. And this second instance is going to be our backup domain controller. Remember, we need 2 domain controllers. One is our primary domain controller, and we need a backup domain controller for redundancy. So I'll just simply go here and choose to add an instance again. And I'm going to create this instance exactly the same way. So I'll choose my Singapore zone. That will then change and give me a list of all the pre-built virtual machines that I can use. And again, I'm going to choose my Windows 2008 R2, and I'll go to step 2. Again, this is going to be 1 core, 2 gigahertz and 2 gigabytes of RAM. Go to step 3. Again, a 100 gigabyte data disk. Step 4. It's going to be part of my internet connected virtual network. Go to step 5, give it a name, and again, make sure that my naming is consistent. So, SBO Demo CL BDC. Okay, because this is my backup domain controller. And my group will be SBO Demo CL, as it was with the previous one. I then say submit. And now, after a couple of seconds, you will see that my next domain controller, my next virtual machine, which is going to be my backup domain controller, is created. Okay, so that's now been created, and again, you can see there is my password that I'm going to need to use for logging onto this virtual machine for the very first time. Right, so I've got a couple of choices now. I can go ahead and log onto this virtual machine via an RDP session, or I am able to go in and I can use the TATA Communications console, and I can simply click down here, and you will see it will open up a console session for me inside a web browser window. Now, again, I tend to find that this environment is just a little bit too slow. It's okay for emergencies and for using before you've configured the RDP port forwarding. But again, I would really keep it just for emergency usage. But just to make sure you know how it works, I'm going to quickly show you. So you go up here, choose Control-Alt-Delete, and you'll see it'll log in with the administrator. And then all I need to do is log in with the password that I have that I've previously noted down. So this is my primary domain controller. So you can see there, it's my DC, my domain controller. So I'm going to want to grab that password. And then I'll choose to log in. And you'll see I'll get my initial login, which will happen for me here. All right, so remember I've got my primary disk and then I've got my secondary data disk. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to get my secondary data disk ready for usage. So I go down here, I'll click on Start. Then I'll go into my administrative tools. Then I will dive into my computer management because I want to go into disk management and I want to bring that secondary hard disk up online and configure it. And so I'll go down here into disk management. And you'll see when I go into disk management that I do actually have my 2 disks, but you'll see that disk number 1, my secondary disk, is offline. That's just the way the system comes up. So I'll right click on that and I'm going to choose to bring it online. And now it's online, but it's not initialized. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to initialize my disk. And I'm going to write this with I can write it with a master boot record, or I can write it with a GUID partition table. Again, I normally use GUID partition tables for all of my machines, particularly because I'm using Windows Server 2008 R2. All right, so we'll just say it's a GUID partition table. Then I'll say OK. And then I'll right click on here. I'll create my new simple volume. I'll say next. I'm going to allocate the entire disk. So again, I'll just say next, and then I'll give it a name after I assign the drive letter. So I usually just call it data disk, but you can call it whatever you like, whatever is meaningful to you. So I'll call it data, well in this case, I'll call it data volume. And I like to perform a quick format. So then I'll say next. And that's now done. So you'll see that's formatting. This will be very, very quick. And there you go. There's my E partition is ready. So anytime I need to store anything on this machine, I will put it on the E partition. If I need to download anything, I'll put it on the E partition because the system drive is only 20 gigabytes. So you don't want to fill that up with content. You just want to leave that sitting there for running all of your operating system components. Okay, anything should be stored on that secondary data disk. All right, so what's the next thing I've got to do? Well, the system has gone in and it's automatically allocated a system allocated name to this machine. So I want to change that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go into my control panel. Now I can do this from the server manager as well. I prefer to do it from the control panel. So I'll go in, I'll just say here, I want to look at these options as large icons. Then I'm going to go into the system applet in the control panel. And I'm going to change the name of my machine. So I'll just double click on that. And you'll see there it is. There is the computer name, which isn't the most intuitive. So I'll go in here and I'll choose change settings. And I'm going to give this a name. So I'll go in here and I'll say change. And so this is going to be the same name that I allocated before. So this is SBO demo CLDC. And I'll say OK. And that little flickering you can see, that's just a standard part of this this console that is created. So now I'll say OK to apply those changes, and then it's going to tell me, hey, make sure you do restart your computer. So I'm going to allow it to restart. So I'll say restart now. You'll see that this console session will close down, and you'll get a little message saying the console cannot be connected to. That's okay when the console reboots. There you go, session is closed. So just close that down. When the session reboots itself, all right, you can go back in here and click on that console session again. I'll just drag it back down here into my recording area, and you'll see that the console session and that session is starting up. So just the same as a normal physical machine starts up with the Microsoft splash screen. We'll give that a couple of seconds. And then I'll log back in again. Same scenario. Choose my Control-Alt-Delete function and put in my password. And again, I cannot stress how important it is that you do make sure that you write down that password, because if you don't, and this message comes up, then you are going to have to go back into the console and you are going to have to do a password reset. All right, so just in case you do run into that problem, all right, you'll go back in here and you'll go here into actions. You'll have to stop the instance, and then you'll have to do the reset password, in which case it will then, after the reset password's done, it will give you the new password in here. Okay? But I can remember my password. So I'll just go and pop it in again. So we've changed our machine name now. The next thing I want to do is I want to change my administrative password to something that's a little bit easier to remember. So I'll go in here, I'll trigger the Control-Alt-Delete keystroke sequence. Give this a second for it to come up, and then I'm going to go and say change my password. I'm going to put in my old password and my new password as well. And when you do create those passwords, make sure you use strong passwords. So I've done that, and I'll say next. That's now gone and it's changed my password. The next thing I need to do is I now need to take this machine, which right now is a standard workstation, and I need to turn it into a domain controller for my domain. So how do I do that? I go into Start, I go into Run, and then I run the DC promo command. And those of you who are familiar with Windows Server will be familiar with this process. So this now opens up the Active Directory Domain Services wizard. And it's going to install the Active Directory Domain Services binaries for me. And then we're going to go through the Active Directory Domain Services installation wizard. And you'll now see the Active Directory Domain Services installation wizard is up. So I'll say next. It's just reminding me that I can configure this to work with previous versions of Windows Server. In this case, I'm not going to worry about that because all my machines are going to be Windows Server 2008 R2. So I want to create a new domain in a new forest. I'm not going to go into the details of creating multiple domains in a forest and everything like that. I'm working on the assumption that you either have somebody who has the applicable knowledge, or this will be enough for you to get you started. So I'll say next. And then I want to put the fully qualified domain name of the forest root domain. So now in this particular instance, what I like to do is I like to go out and I register the domain names. So I will go out right now with my domain name registry and I will register the domain name sbodemocl.com, because I always like to make sure that my fully qualified domain names in the forest root domains are the same ones that I'm using on the internet. So I'm going to go off and do that right now. But I'm not going to record that process. You'll do whatever you need to do to take care of that activity. That now. So I'll put in sbodemocl.com and I'll say next. It's going to verify the NetBIOS name, and then I'm going to double check that that is going to use the NetBIOS name that I want. So I'll change my forest functional level as well, because I want it to be Windows Server 2008 R2. And then I'll say next. It's now going to look at the DNS settings, and it's going to want to create a DNS server on this machine, and it's going to make it the global catalog server. So that's fine. So I'll go ahead and say next. Now here's an important point to note. What happens with the Instacompute virtual machines is that they do get allocated dynamic IP addresses. You don't need to go in and change these to static IP addresses because they won't change anyway. Even though they're dynamically allocated, you will always get the same IP address dynamically allocated to each of your machines. So I'm going to say to leave it as yes. And then it's going to say, it's just going to give me a DNS error, which is fine. That's okay. I'm going to want to go ahead and continue. not going to go into the description and the explanation of how DNS works and everything like that. I'll say next. Let it just create the default locations for the database log files and sysvol. Then I want to create a directory services restore mode administrator password. Again, use a strong password for this. And say next. That's fine. The NetBIOS name is sbodemocl. The new domain is sbodemocl.com. That's all good. So I'll say next. And now I'm going to let the wizard sit there and do all of the things that it needs to do in order for this machine to be created as a domain controller. Right, once it's finished, I'm then going to go to my backup domain controller. I'm going to go through the same process there. I'm going to change the name of the machine. I'm then going to join that machine to this domain, and then I am going to run the DC promo process there and configure it as a backup domain controller. One thing I will do as well here is I'll tell it to reboot on completion, and you'll now see that that is complete, so my virtual machine is going to restart. Now that's rebooted. After running that, I'll go and Control-Alt-Delete. And now you'll see that it is going to log on to the new domain with the administrator username. And I'm now going to pop in the password that I created before, because that is the default password that the system is going to take on for this administrator user. So that's all ready to go. Now, one thing I do want to do is I want to go in and I want to double check what the IP address is that has been allocated to this machine. I need this because I may need to make a configuration change on the backup domain controller so it knows to use this machine as the DNS server when I'm joining it to the domain. So let's just pop down here and have a quick look. And I can look at my local area connection, and look at my details. And I can see that this is IP address 10.1.1.39. So I'll make a note of that. And so that's now completed. The next step I want to do with this machine is, of course, I do want to go and I'll want to run my Windows update, because I want to make sure that I get this virtual machine all up and running and fully configured with all the latest updates. So I'll just go into my control panel again, scroll down, you'll see I have my Windows update. So I'm going to run that. I'll turn on my automatic updates. Now again, normally when you're doing this, you'll probably want to put your automatic updates on, but just get it to download the updates and not automatically apply them, because you want to have control over when they get applied, because a lot of the time when you apply those Windows updates, what has to happen? The system has to do a restart. So obviously you don't want that happening automatically. If you've got users on the system, you want to control that, manage it, and schedule it for the appropriate period of downtime. I'm not going to worry about it because, again, this is purely for our purposes. This is just a demo environment that I'm going to blow away at the end of recording this session anyway. So you can see after installing that first component that the Windows update is now running again. We'll let that check for its updates. Now, of course, one of the things that you may want to do if you are running a large number of servers in your environment is you may choose to install Windows Server Update Services. And what that will do is that will pull all of your Windows updates down to a single machine, and then you can push those updates out from within your virtual network. That will reduce the amount of time that you have to go out to the internet, and of course that will reduce your bandwidth that's consumed and will reduce your overall hosting costs. But in this case, again, demo, not worried too much about that. So there's my 67 important updates are available, and there's 2 optional updates. Let's go and have a look at those. And I'll pull down both of those, so that'll give me 69 updates in total. I'll say OK. And I'll install all those updates. So it's going to have to go through the process of downloading all of those after I accept the Microsoft license terms for some of these updates. So I'm going to let that sit there and go through that in the background. All right, so I can now close down this console session, and I can now go and start configuring my backup domain controller. So again, same scenario. I click here on the console session. There it is. Bring it up, go in, run my Control-Alt-Delete. Again, I'll need the password that I configured, or that was automatically configured for me when this machine was created. And then once you're logged in, the next thing you want to do is you want to change the name of this machine first, and you want to join it to the domain. Now you can do both of those activities at the same time because this is going to be your backup domain controller. So all I need to do here is click on Start, again go into my control panel, and I'll go to my category over here and change that to show me large icons. Again, that's the way I like to work within Windows. Go down to my System Control Panel Applet. And then I'll go in here into my change settings. So what do I want to do? I want to change, so I'll click here on change. And in this particular instance, I can do both at the same time. So this machine is going to be called SBO Demo CL BDC. And then what I want to do is I want to join it to my domain. And again in here I will put my domain name, which again was SBO Demo CL.com. Now, what's going to happen is it's going to go out and it's going to try and join my domain. Now, hopefully it's going to be able to find the domain controller. However, it may not be able to do that. And you can see that's exactly what's happened here. Because there is no DNS server configured for this machine, it doesn't know how to go out and find the domain controller. So, what do I need to do? I'll just click on OK there. And I need to go down to my network. I need to open up my network and sharing center. And I'm just going to need to go in to my local area connection. I'll need to go into the properties of my network, my virtual network connection. Go into my TCP/IP version 4 configuration. go to my properties, and then I'll need to tell it to use the DNS server address of my primary domain controller. So again, that's why it's important to write that down. I'll say OK to that. And close that. And close that. And so now if I go back here into my system properties and I say OK, you'll see that it can now contact the primary domain controller, and it's just going to prompt me for the username and password of an account that has the right to add computers to the domain. So I'll put in my administrator username and password. And what you'll see happen is you'll see that the computer name will change, it'll join the domain, and you'll know it's been successful when I get this welcome to the sbodemocl.com domain message. And again, a message that I'm going to need to restart for those changes to take effect. So I'm going to allow the system to do that. I'll click on close and choose restart now, and let that console close down the same way as the other one has. And then I'll give it a couple of seconds and come back into the console and double check that everything went as I expected it to. All right, so we're back into our console. It's applying all the computer settings, making the necessary changes, applying all the policies that it's inheriting from the primary domain controller. And then we'll do our Control-Alt-Delete to log on. Again, you'll see it is right now trying to log on with a local machine account. I don't want it to do that. I don't want it to log on with the local machine account. So I want to go in here into Other User. And you'll see it's now going to try to log on to the domain, which is exactly what I want. So I'll log on with my domain administrator account. Now, if by chance you see that down the bottom here, this changes when you put in the administrator username, it changes back to the local machine name, all you're going to have to do there is go back here into this administrator name and put it in with the full qualification. So SBODEMOCL/administrator. So that will make sure it forces it to log on to the domain. And now the machine is now logging on. That should only be a once-off activity, because from now on, every time you log in, it should automatically try and log in with a domain username. But the backup domain controller is really sitting there as a fail-safe or a redundancy, just in case your primary domain controller goes down. Because of course, remember, if your primary domain controller goes down and you don't have a backup and you're using single sign-on, then no one will be able to log on to the environment. So it is a very, very critical component of your cloud infrastructure. So that's now done. I'm now logged on. So remember, the next step was to actually take this machine and turn it into a backup domain controller, because right now it's just a server joined to the domain. So again, same scenario. I run my DC promo command, and the Active Directory services binaries will be installed, and then the installation wizard will kick off, and I'll tell it that I want to configure this machine as a backup domain controller. So let's give that a couple of seconds to go through that process. So we're now ready to start running that installation. So I'll say next. Again, just a reminder about the different operating system compatibility settings. And I want to choose it's an existing forest. And in this case, I'm adding a domain controller to an existing domain, so I'll say next. And you'll see it's automatically picked up the name of the domain in the forest. It's going to ask me for my account credentials. Again, the one that I'm logged in is the domain administrator, so that's fine. So I'll say next. That's the domain that I'm using, so that's all good. So I'll say next. And I don't want this to be a DNS server because I already have my DNS server, which is my primary domain controller. Now, whether or not you want this to be a global catalog or not is up to you. Okay. I would probably recommend that you do set this up as a global catalog, just in case you have a catastrophic failure of your primary domain controller. You can then automatically just take this domain controller and start using it as your primary. Again, all of your standard settings are fine. Your directory services restore mode administrator account needs a password set for it as well. I would recommend you use the same one on both domain controllers, your primary and your backup. We'll say next. And then we will let the installation wizard continue on and complete its activities. Again, I'm going to set it to reboot on completion. And then when I come back, this server is now going to be ready. What's the next thing I'm going to do? Well, again, I'm going to make sure that I run my Windows update so that both my primary and my backup domain controllers are fully configured with all of the necessary Windows updates and patches and security patches so that they're now ready to go. So that completes session 1 that I wanted to record and deliver to you. In session 2, what we're going to do is we're going to create another couple of machines. We're going to create our SQL server. We're going to create our remote desktop server. And importantly, we're also going to create the virtual machine for our cloud control center. So I'll cover those in our next session, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Thank you.